911 operators of Reddit, what's the strangest serious emergency you've heard? Not me, but my cousin. She had this lady who would call regularly and often make up stories, most likely due to loneliness, but they still had to send someone out every time. So one day when they got a call from her, they figured it would be another one of those calls. Cousin. 911. What's your emergency? Her. There's a lion in my living room. Cousin. There's a lion in your living room. What's it doing? Her. Pauses to ask it what it was doing. I don't know, just standing there. Can you send someone over? It turned out there actually was a lion cub in her living room that had escaped from a circus or something nearby. Story 2. The very first emergency call I took by myself during training. Trainer was hooked into my phone and could jump in whenever. I answered a 911 while my trainer was trying to grab a cup of coffee from the machine, long cords. And as soon as the phone connected, there was what sounded like an explosion and people screaming all over the place. Scared the Jesus out of my trainer, who sprinted back to the desk thinking I just picked up some huge disaster or accident, takes over the call, starts asking questions. And it turns out what we heard was just rushing water from a hot water heater that ruptured and was spewing water all over these two girls' apartment. And they were freaking out, not knowing what to do about it. Bonus story. Had a similar call a few years later, picked up to a bunch of people being loud, sounding panicked, talking about someone being locked in a car. Thought it was a child locked in a car. A very high priority call for my agency due to being in Florida and a few recent deaths. So I put the call in as urgent while trying to get anyone on the phone to actually talk to me. But then I hear a door open and someone in the background scream, "It's out! The chicken is free!" Phone disconnects. Florida story 3. Obligatory, not 911 operator. I'm the son of the caller. My dad called 911 late one night to report hitting a 6-foot-tall chicken while driving and running off into the ditch. He had just crashed his car and his voice was a bit shaky on the phone. So the operator asked him to repeat himself a couple of times and then promised to send someone to help. The first cop on scene got out of his car with a breathalyzer in hand. By the time he got to the back of my dad's car, he was laughing hysterically over his radio telling people that it wasn't a DUI call. My dad actually did hit a 6-foot-tall chicken. And that's the story about the night my dad and all the local cops learned about emu farming. Story 4. Lots of calls from elderly people hallucinating because of a UTI. One woman had been following CPR instructions, and when the crew arrived, she was doing very gentle chest compressions on her slightly confused but very much alive cat. Story 5. From an older post. My mom was a dispatcher for 20 years. The eeriest call she ever told me about was one that started off with no voice, only breathing. She kept asking yes or no questions, working out a system to guess what was going on. Eventually, he could talk a little bit and said the person who heard him was still there. So the officers went in, guns drawn. He'd said the person was there, but hadn't specified that they were dead. Turns out the guy couldn't talk because his throat was sliced open, which he had done to himself, to make it look like his wife, whom he had just murdered, had attacked him first. Story 6. 911. What's your emergency? There's a pig in the road, a big one. Sir, where are you? At the stoplight. It's the biggest damn pig I've ever seen. Get someone here now. One stoplight town, the bar is near the intersection. How big is the pig? About the size of a Volkswagen. How much have you had to drink? I'm not ducking drunk. It's a giant pig the size of a small car. What is wrong with you people? Officers show up to find a full-grown hippo that had escaped from the local wild animal park. Big, ducking pig. ETA. This was at 2:30 a.m. when the bars closed. Story 7. Not me, but my dad works in an emergency room, and one time he had to treat someone who had been attacked by an owl. The owl was unconscious on the side of the road, and she thought it was dead. Because she didn't want the children on the school bus to see the dead owl, she decided the best course of action would be to put the owl in the back of her car. Unfortunately, the owl wasn't dead. It woke up and attacked her. Story 8. I've got one for you. The obligatory, not 911, but it'll tie together. So I worked for an alarm monitoring company. I get an inbound call in the middle of the night from somewhere in Philadelphia. Guy on the line sounds real out of it. Drunk, maybe? My first thought was it was someone calling in to cancel a false alarm. Messed up voice was them waking from sleep. Not uncommon. Some alarms, start going off in my head. The guy isn't making a whole lot of sense, and it's really hard to get basic information out of him. Eventually, I pieced together that he's a gas station worker and he's been shot. For some reason, he dialed the alarm company instead of 911. We weren't even his alarm company. There was probably an old sticker in the shop somewhere. So I've got no info on this guy. Mind you, we don't have any magical reverse phone lookup system, and our systems are locked down such that we can't access a web browser. Genius, I know. Pulled out my phone, also not allowed. Managed to look up a gas station with the inbound number in Philly, called 911, and got police and medical out there. No idea how it ultimately shook out. Stayed on the line, keeping the guy conscious and talking until they got there, then disconnected. Story 9. We got a call from a woman having severe abdominal pain. Simple enough. We asked the normal questions. Are you feeling faint? Stuff like that. Then we asked if it was traumatic or not. Well, she eventually tells us that she had a tampon stuck inside of her for more than 20 days, and she thinks that might be why she's hurting. Bonus story. I heard someone else that had a funny story. This guy and his wife were playing around with various vegetables, and the guy gets a carrot lodged up his, So they tried to remove it so they wouldn't have to call 911. She used a pair of burger tongs and grabbed onto something and pulled, but she was actually pulling at his intestine. Fun! If you get something stuck, just call 911. I've heard it all before. I don't care that you have a vegetable garden in your rectum. I just want to get you help. Story 10. I'm a telephone triage nurse, so not 911, but a 24-hour hotline for people to call when they are having a medical problem, but aren't sure if they need to go to the ER or not. I have a few favorite stories, but I'll share this one. A quite pregnant, don't remember exactly how far along, but definitely past 30 weeks. Woman calls to say that her doctor told her to refrain from having sex for the rest of the pregnancy, and she didn't understand why. I looked at her file and saw she was having preterm contraction, so I explained that activity can cause contractions, so it was safer to abstain so the baby could stay inside as long as possible. She tearfully exclaimed, "But how will I feed the baby?" Me, "I'm sorry, ma'am, could you repeat that?" Patient, "How will I feed the baby if I can't have sex?" The patient was convinced that her baby was living off of her boyfriend's semen, and that it would starve if they stopped having sex. I explained about the umbilical cord, etc., but she refused to believe me until I asked her about single moms, etc., and asked how she thought their babies fed and grew. After a moment of silence, she thanked me and started to hang up the phone, but not before I heard her screaming her boyfriend's name. That man had a good thing going for a while there. I honestly wasn't sure if I felt more sorry for him or a baby growing up in that household. Story 11. I got dispatched for neck pain. Get there, find out a couple were having sex on a couch when the female heard a large pop in her head, followed by a splitting headache and nausea. We transport and after a CT scan, find that she somehow developed a tear in her arachnoid meningeal tissue. Serious crap, but humorous and odd. Story 12. My sister's an EMT in a small rural college town. Apparently there have been more than one calls about horses collapsing and hurting their rider handler, broken arms, legs, trapped under horse, etc. When she was new to it, someone just described it as a collapsed horse, and she thought that they were supposed to treat the horse's condition. Story 13. Heard this one the other day. Not from the perspective of an operator, but close. Responds to a call where a man reported having multiple potatoes stuck up his rectum/colon. Not red potatoes, those big brown suckers. The kicker. I was washing my potatoes in the shower when I slipped and fell, and all the potatoes went up there. What? Story 14. We had a lady who would call all the time about people in her yard or on her house, usually doing nasty things, always a false alarm. This lady had been calling since way before I got my job, and even now after I've switched agencies, she's probably still calling. She's mental, but not a danger to herself or others, so no real need to commit her involuntarily. Well, one day we get a call from her about a man at her house causing the troubles for her. My supervisor, who had answered the call, finally got fed up and asked to speak to the man. To everyone's surprise, the woman handed the phone over to the man, and there was someone there. It was her brother. He was there trying to get her committed. We ended up, I believe, asking him to leave the property because he couldn't have her committed against her will at that time. Just goes to show you that crazy doesn't always mean wrong. Story 15. 1. Ultra calm caller, girlfriend is having a fit me. Does she have any weapons? Him. Just the eggs she's throwing at me. Me. What is she wearing? Him. Underwear. 2. Took a call for a hostage situation in a cab once. The driver was talking to me, but trying not to make it obvious. Passenger implied a weapon and wanted him to drive to the middle of nowhere so that he could abuse him and the lady in the front seat. The driver ended up crashing into another car to cause a distraction. 3. Screaming lady caller. He's throwing the car thing at me. It was a hubcap. Or he flushed my substances, so I poured his beer out and we about to throw down. Second 5. Guy found his pet cat's head sitting upright on the table on his front porch. No body. Called back later, someone had placed the body in his car. Story 16. Nothing really jumps out at me as strangest. I can think of worst, scariest, dumbest, most infuriating, etc. Some good ones are people saying they locked themselves inside their car, getting ripped off by an escort, someone stealing their things by things they meant a safe full of subsentences, a mugger going around and hitting people in the neck with a taser yelling, "Surprise, mother ducker," in a deep voice, then taking their phone/wallets. Just so damn many 911 calls with people essentially calling and getting themselves arrested because they were in the wrong and not the person they called on. Guy went jogging along the beach, came back to find his car gone. While driving him home after taking a report, we drove by it. He forgot where he parked. Try to let a guy off who was obviously up to some shady crap. Tell him and his girlfriend to just go rent a room and rethink their lives. They stole the cop's cell phone. He made a call for them because their phone was dead. Ended up having a duck ton of meth in his car when he caught up to him later. Guy got into a fight with a bunch of ducks, started losing, tried jumping a fence, slipped and tore his balls on the fence thinking about it. I do have one. Her boyfriend is bleeding in the shower. I tried to get her to say where and how. She beats around the bush and doesn't come right out. We got the paramedic to tell us afterward. She's a nurse and they were fooling around. She tried to catheterize him while he was hard, ended up puncturing something, and they couldn't get the bleeding to stop. Story 17. The emergency itself wasn't particularly strange, nor was the call mine. But in training, I listened to a call that contained the following exchange. So she's bleeding now? Yep. Where is she bleeding from? From her bottom part. Which bottom part, sir? I need you to be specific. Inside front part. Wait, what? Damn it, from her pussy. Story 18. I responded to a man in his whitey-tighties standing on the yellow lines in the middle of the road. Arrived on scene to find this to be true. The reason he was in the middle of the road was to practice his karate moves on cars. Dispatch was even having a hard time keeping from laughing. Story 19. Okay, so my friend is a former 911 operator and she told me that she got this call from what sounded like an old man. B was telling her that it's been a while and that she should come back over. Like, hey, it's been so long, I miss you. Do you still remember the address? 123 Street, remember? She assumed that he was just senile or something. Turns out he had someone in his house, and he didn't want them to know he was calling 911. For clarification, she did dispatch someone just in case the old man was incapable of taking care of himself. She thought he was senile, and that's how they found out. Story 20. Police, how can I help you? Yeah, I was walking through town, and I've come across a dolphin. A dolphin. Yeah, it's in the alleyway just off the high street. Officers turn up, and there is indeed a dead dolphin in an alleyway approximately 15 miles from the nearest coastline. Story 21 was a 911 op for 5 years. Had a female call screaming, "He's beating me." She's get away from her husband who's going at her over and over with an ice pick. It becomes evident to me that she's moving around the house in an attempt to get away. I'm telling her, can you barricade yourself? Can you get away from him? Can you get out of the house? She told me that she's trying and that interjects that her husband is blind. Now, I'm really confused. She's not giving me much information, typical with panicky victims in the heat of a crime, and I'm trying to figure out how she can't get away from a blind person. She gets quiet and I can hear him saying all kinds of nasty things about her. Cops get there, secure the scene, and they fly her to a trauma center. She lived. Still, we were all standing around after, so confused that this woman couldn't escape a blind man from beating her. Story 22. I had a girl, found out her age later, call in while her brother was beating her. Never have I ever wanted to crawl through a telephone line so desperately as during that call. She survived, but there was some brain damage, and she was in ICU for months. Story 23. One day I had walked in after getting a Subway sandwich. My shift started at 1 p.m. Coworkers had received both 911 and normal calls from a wife and mother about their husband, yet he was just walking around and talking about taking all the children to heaven and circling the house for hours. There was a newborn, a toddler, and I think a 5-year-old. It was on a weekend, and our chief advised that as long as he isn't acting dangerous or violent, just odd, then they can wait for a mental health warrant from the Justice of the Peace on Monday. It's East Texas, and it's a good 20-30 minute drive going the speed limit to get anywhere in the county, and sometimes over an hour from one end to another if you know where you're going. Well, this continues up until about 11 p.m. The mother and wife are getting more and more antsy that he's been walking in circles all day and muttering the same thing for hours. Then, I get a call that begins with a loud bang, screaming and crying from the wife and her newborn. The husband had lost his 2 sons and was coming for her. She cried that, why didn't we help them? And to please save me and my babies. And then after about 10 seconds, another bang. The wife was passed near instantly. After that, maybe a minute later, I heard another bang, the guy in his life. And that's it, story 24. For a year in college, as a 711 operator. For those not in the US, this is the national relay service provided for deaf or hard of hearing properly who need to use the phone. Occasionally, in real 911 emergencies, people would misdial 7111 instead. Happens a lot, and that's fine. We just keep you on the line and transfer to 911 for you. But by law, we are required to stay on the line until the call is completed in case our services are legitimately needed. So most of the time we mute ourselves and stay out of the way. But one time, I legit had a deaf person using a TTY device calling to report a break-in at her house. It's very important to note that these chimes are not quiet, which you can see from watching more of the video. I had to interrupt the call to advise the 911 operator that her TTY would be making very loud sounds, indicating her position in the house, and alert her presence to the intruder, and that she was likely not aware she was being so loud. We had to encourage her to be very brief with her words, to limit the sound she made, to give only her address, and then hide immediately without using the phone any longer because it would give her away. After typing only her address, she stopped typing back, so I switched my system over from Tati incoming translation to normal audio so the 911 operator and I could both hear any ambient sounds on the line. After maybe 15 minutes of harrowing dead silence, we finally heard police knocking very loudly on the door. Not that the lady could hear this. They eventually got into the house, either through an unlocked door or maybe they broke it down. No idea, but after a while an officer picked up the phone to let us know the situation was under control and that we could hang up now. No idea what resolution happened, but I assume she was fine. Story 25. Coworker's story, not my own. She receives a call from a man who told her that his car had gotten stuck on the railroad track. She had never taken a call like that before, but when he asked if he should get out of the vehicle, ended up telling him to move away from the car just to be safe. We did call to get the train stopped, of course, but not before one hit his car. Good thing he got out. On story 26, the first call I took was from a blind elderly male. He called because he had found his son on the floor of a bedroom. He was not responding, so I had him tilt his head back and listen for a breath. Nothing. He said he was warm, and he had talked with him less than 20 minutes prior, so I guided him through CPR. Compressions only because of the circumstances. He lived in a rural part of our county, and we were low on rigs, so we did this for about 12 minutes before help arrived on scene. Ems goes inside and immediately asks for PD. This isn't unusual. Sometimes loved ones can't or don't want to believe that it's too late. So we go through the motions until a trained eye is there. PD gets there and asks for a detective. This is also not unusual for younger deaths. 2 hours later and still there, it piques my curiosity. I called the first officer that arrived and found out that the poor man had been doing CPR on his now dead son. He had been taking a nap and his son ended his life. It woke him up, but not quick enough for it to register as a gunshot. I think it worked out for the best because he had support there when he learned the truth, and it didn't make my job any tougher, but it definitely made for an unusual start to my dispatch career. Story 27. Best memorable call I had was when I was still training. It was a few days into starting to take 911 calls on my own with my trainer, just listening in, and I get a very calm lady asking for paramedics. I ask her for the address and why. My son lost his junk. I parroted what I heard back while mentally I was going, "Excuse me, what?" Lady confirms that her son lost his junk. Now the whole room is bustling and getting the resources I need for this guy with a knife who is probably bleeding out. I ask where her son is in the house, where the knife is, etc. When the lady can't really answer my questions, that's when I know something is up. She has no idea where he is and she never saw him cut anything off. So I ask how she knew her son did this, and she replies, "I have visions and revelations. I can see the knife." Oh boy. It becomes a back and forth figuring out who her son is, and if anyone's even hurt. Lady even gave a neighbor's address instead of her own. Eventually, we find her son's phone number through associations. The guy is actually just 2 years younger than her, and a roommate. So my supervisor hops on the phone and calls the guy and cuts to the chase. "Is this so-and-so? Did you lost your junk?" Spoiler, his junk was still attached to his body. That was almost 4 years ago, and I still bring it up to curious new trainees when they ask. Otherwise, the other calls I remember. Double homicide. Talk to the teenager that managed to run out of the house after an adult roommate lost mom and the teen's boyfriend. Teen thankfully wasn't hurt and ran to a neighbor's house. She vividly remembered every detail and was very calm until officers were with her. She was a stellar AP and was very mature. I'm very proud of her keeping herself collected after seeing everything happen. I hope her life has turned for the better since then. Death on the phone. My first one. Older guy called in from his house phone and very calmly started telling me his address, name, and date of birth. He proceeded to say to tell his family he couldn't take it anymore and asked us to turn off his front porch light when we arrived. Also, gave us next of kin info. I tried talking to him, but he didn't even acknowledge me. He had made up his mind. I heard a metallic bang immediately after he gave me the last bit of instructions. First, I thought I heard a metal chair or step stool fall onto tile floor. I kept an open line until officers were with him, confirming a self-inflicted wound through the left temple. Guy had a ton of health problems and just couldn't take it anymore. I can vividly remember the raspy and scratchy sounds I heard during the open line, which I believe were gasps, rattles, and body twitches. He passed outside so his family didn't have to deal with cleanup. And, of course, we had no other callers reporting shots fired in the area. Story 28. My friend in the ER told me how someone passed out on an escalator and his hand was running onto the grate where the top of the escalator meets the floor for half an hour before someone found him. His hand was pretty hit from what I heard. Story 29. I answered the phone and gave my usual 911, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? And the person on the other end just started screaming, bees, bees! I assumed that the bees were neither mugging him nor on fire, so I put it through to ambulance because what the duck even. Story 30, obligatory, not a 911 operator, but my soon-to-be mother-in-law. She got a call that a guy and his roommate were doing substance, heroin, and the caller's friend overdosed. So this absolute Mensa hooks up a couple wires to the inside of a toaster, turns the toaster on, and attaches the wires to his unconscious friend's balls. Honestly, not sure if it successfully electrocuted the unconscious guy, but the caller definitely seemed to think it would wake his friend up. My mother-in-law's response, sir, please don't do that again. Story 31. I was a zero operator, not 911. But many small towns didn't have 911, so I got quite a few emergency calls. I got a call from a girl once that had just gotten home from school. She couldn't find her father, but there was an ominous note there that she had read to me. I had police on the way and told her to wait outside for them. Rather, I heard her walking around her house, going from room to room, opening doors, looking for him. After about a minute, she let out a blood-curdling scream, yelling, "He's here! He's here!" He was passing the garage. It was a terrible call. I got a 15-minute break and had to get back on the board taking calls again. It's been almost 20 years and I can still hear her voice. That's story 32. This one requires a little backstory before the actual call. We had a female that called quite often, even moved from our jurisdiction to another location. But because we were better at customer service, she wouldn't call them on 911. She'd call our 7-digit non-emergency line to get us. She called regularly, often for ridiculousness, like the time she told me her gay neighbors, who were abomination, were also watching her while she showered. Another instance, she called to let us know elves were at her house and had stolen both her hair and her uterus. Needless to say, not all there. Every time we ask her if she wants someone out there, and she always says no. Fast forward a while, she's in this other jurisdiction, so we can't respond, mind you, and tells us that a man was smoking cigarettes under her mattress. We go through the usual routines for her, and surprisingly, she says she wants someone over. We call the local PD and tell them the nature of her call and politely suggest, due to her out-of-the-ordinary request to see someone, that they send someone out. Police arrived to find a homeless man smoking cigarettes under her bed. He'd pried open a window and snuck in to get out of the weather. Few crazy, funny, weird calls that are just bizarre. Lady calls to complain that the power entering her house is now coming from a different direction due to construction down the road from her to the north and that it is causing power fluctuations. Being rational, I let it go and go to tell her that it's a power company problem, not 911. She then says it's our problem because every time the power fluctuated, people entered her house. My personal login was that it must be interfering with her alarm. So I asked how they were gaining entry, to which she responded through my chest. My brain tried to rationalize it in any way I could, but nothing was coming to me, short of someone tunneling into her home, which was absurd. So my next question was, what chest? Through my chest, from right between my breasts. She received a prompt response. Next up was the woman that gave me a general area to check because zombies were surrounding her house, and she wanted us to get out there and do what we do. Story 33. My father used to be a cop, and during training they listened 2 funny calls for some relief. One of the best ones was of a guy that called in a wreck he had with a deer. Male. This was a while back, so he was in a phone booth when he started screaming. The stag was only unconscious and had started attacking the phone booth was in it. Story 34. It is not me. My friend had to take care of a couple doing their thing in a tree. They somehow got stuck and had to call for help getting down. When he and his team arrived, he saw his cousin, of course, all naked. Story 35. Was about to leave after a really calm night shift. Take one last call. This guy just asked for an ambulance for his mother, like so many early in the morning. No panic or anything in his voice. So as always, I ask him what's happening before I transfer him to the paramedics. And he just say, well, I think I just hit her, but I'm not sure if she's passed yet. And he put the phone on the side. 30-sec pass. No sound. He picked back up and tell me, well, I just made sure and bear her a few more times. I'll be waiting outside by. 9 years and still clear in my mind. Turned out he was mentally sick and her mother kept him home. Story 36. I was told about one where a teenager had climbed into one of those baby swings at the park and gotten stuck. He had to be cut out of it by firefighters. Story 37. Worked as a 911 dispatcher a few years ago. An old man called one day. He was all panicked. Just by hearing his voice, I was sure I was going, send the ambulance for his dead wife. I asked him a few questions about his address and I asked him calmly, sir, what's the emergency? He was still panicked and told me with a shaky voice, my wife. She picked the margarine in the fridge and it's all turned to oil. What should we do? I waited a few seconds expecting a burst of laugh, but no. The poor old man was serious. He had margarine issue and called the 911. Good times. Story 38. Not an operator, though I want to be now. This is a 911 call on me made by my BF in our small hometown. I have a rare disease called fibrous dysplasia McCune-Albright syndrome. This makes them bend, break, and deform easily. I have it in multiple vital bones of my body. Well, this leads to the one fateful night, actually exactly 1 year ago tonight, where my BF has to call 911. He says, "We need an ambulance." She asks what for, to which he responds, "My girlfriend has FD and her legs broke." Her, "Was there an accident? Did she fall?" Him, "No, she was walking," getting a bit annoyed. Her, unbelieving despite my continuous screaming in the background. "What makes you think they're broken? What happened?" Him, "Just done. Her legs are weak and they broke. Send an ambulance." Her, "Okay, sir, I'm sending help. But did she hit something? Did she fall on something wrong? How do you know they're broken?" Him, gets right up by me while I'm screaming, "Her legs are broken." Click. The ambulance that showed up wasn't even fully prepared. I guess they really did have a hard time believing that someone's legs could just break on them while walking. They had to tear up a box we had laying nearby to stabilize it as much as possible. And they had to lift me to the stretcher thing in a sheet with the help of the firemen. That was absolutely excruciating. With a broken left tibia, broken left fibula, and broken and completely displaced right femur. The worst. No meds until they got me to the plane to flight me to the hospital in the nearest city. Lesson to operators. Sometimes people aren't just crazy. Sometimes bones really do just break. Story 39. I'm not a 911 operator, but I work in the emergency department at a level 1 trauma center. I got some interesting ones. When one, we had a helicopter land. MVC, motor vehicle crash, involving a toddler, a bear, and some serious burns. Apparently this family has the worst luck. They were going highway speeds, just dad with toddler in the back. The car in front of them hit a bear on the highway. Dad pulled over to help the other driver, leaving kid in their car seat in the back seat. Then another car came and hit the dad's car. The kid's car seat was pushed into the front passenger seat. Then the dad's car caught fire with the kid in it. Dad pulled the kid out. The kid had third-degree burns covering a good portion of his body. 2. Another MVC, PT, was driving home from a family event and swerved off the road right into a tree. One leg lost at the scene, the other was really hurt. 3. Psych patient trauma. Patient apparently didn't want to be a male anymore, so they took a razor blade to, well, you can imagine. 4. 4th of July fireworks injury via deer. Senior citizen PT was celebrating the 4th with family outside. Apparently their property is near the woods, because when they started shooting fireworks, a deer came out of the woods scared as crap and kicked grandma in the head while trying to jump over her. 5. I was walking from one part of the ED to the other when I heard a trauma called out on Vocera. I then see the triage medic sprinting down the hall with a baby in his arms, followed by what I guessed was mom and dad. The triage medic was calling for people to clear the way as he was running to the trauma area. I start calling out too. Along the way, blocking the trauma pod is an old woman with a walker and a slightly less old woman directing her. I yell at them to move and they stand there like a deer in headlights. I physically had to drag the walker and the old lady holding onto it out of the way before the medic ran them over. Baby's aunt was pulling out of the driveway and had run and nearly run over baby. Story 40. Not a 911 operator, but was in the vicinity. My best friend, we will call D, and I walked in his parents' house, expecting to find his girlfriend, let's call her K, on the couch or the bed, where we were all gonna smoke a joint, chill, and I was gonna crash on the couch. On that exact same couch was K, skin mostly pale, lips blue and a foam-like substance, a half-empty syringe beside her, and a dinner plate with a then unknown powder on the coffee table in front of her. D freaks out, smacking her face, lying her on her side, and desperately trying to get her to wake up. I don't care if they arrested all of us at this point and called 911. As I am talking to the 911 operator, D cries, "She's got a pulse, man, I think," and began hugging her, sobbing, "Please wake up, baby." His parents ended up coming downstairs. His mom freaked out and was crying as his dad seen the plate and began screaming about substances being in the house. It got bad. I walked outside to finish the call before I broke down. It was soul-crushing to watch. Turns out Kay was still alive. Pulse was 35, very close to total cardiac arrest. The powder was fentanyl. No one was arrested. There's a law in my state that if EMTs are called and not police, the suspect cannot legally be charged with any substances found at the location. They kept her for 2 days, giving her Narcan all throughout the first night. She went to rehab, and now she is with another classmate, happily married, and with 2 children. D. Well, not so well, but that's for another time. Story 41. My wife has worked the Poison Information Center for years. She has stories, such as this one. Guy called, clearly in pain, ill and ease. And throughout the call, my wife could hear the voice of a woman laughing uncontrollably. Turns out the guy wanted a bit of quality intimacy with his girlfriend, who just wasn't in the mood that night. He can't sleep on account of this major case of blue balls. So he gets up, still in the dark, grabs the lotion and heads to the toilet to pleasure himself. That's when the burning started. Turns out it wasn't lotion after all, but a tube of neat. So the poor guy had horrible junk hurt, while his girlfriend is laughing hysterically. And the laughter gets contagious as first my wife, then her coworkers all overhear what's happening and start laughing uncontrollably themselves. Told him to put it in a glass of cold ice water, with tears in their eyes. On the other hand, there was the time a guy called after his pet tarantula, fanged him in the tongue after he put it in his mouth. Story 42, throwaway. I wasn't the dispatcher, but I was called for mutual aid to a call one time. My buddy was the dispatcher that night for the county sheriff, and I was volunteering at a rural fire department. Anyway, around 11 p.m., we get paged out for a mutual aid, a search operation for a missing hunter at a local hunting camp. It's a small department, so it's just me and a kind of new guy. We get there, and the sheriff and primary responding department tells us it's just some hunter who got separated from his party, which is fairly normal, happens a couple times a year. But they have the rest of his party sitting in the squad car. I'm talking to the sheriff trying to get a grasp of where they haven't checked yet, and my probie goes to walk around. He came back and said the guys in the back of the squad car were just sitting there, staring straight ahead and not blinking. I'm confused at this point because it's a hunting party, and they generally call in a missing person early afternoon, not at 11 p.m. So I call my buddy at dispatch to try to figure out what's going on. The sheriff wasn't being helpful. He tells me he got some weird call with a man that sounded like he was terrified, but would only whisper about how they're moving. My buddy finally gets the man on the phone to say where they are, and then the guy whispers, "I think they got him," and hangs up. I haven't heard much more on the story, but I know the call came from one of the guys in the hunting party that was in the back of the squad car. A couple months back, a buddy at a neighboring paid department told me 2 of the guys in the party hit themselves shortly after, and the third guy has been in and out of substances treatment centers since that day. I haven't verified any of that, so it could just be rumors. As far as I know, the missing hunter still hasn't been located. Story 43. I am not the source. This happened to my brother-in-law. He was a paramedic and his ambulance was responding to a call in the poor part of the city. A girl was bleeding. They got there and the girl said she was bleeding from inside. The mother was there, but was clueless. They looked around and counted the number of siblings. I don't remember the exact number, but it was over a dozen. The mother had never had a period in her life. She really did not know what it was and could not explain it to her daughter. This is my favorite true story of how messed up the welfare system can be. Story 44. Another funnier style call that we had was during the winter. It was extremely cold for where we live. Alabama in the single digits. We had been getting several calls about water pipes bursting. I took a 911 call right after taking 6-7 calls about bursting pipes. Naturally, the woman sounds very disgruntled and said that her water just broke at 3:30 in the morning. Me, not thinking, asked her who her water was through. She responds with, "What the duck are you asking me? My water just broke." That is when the light bulb lit up. She was pregnant. Baby was born healthy, by the way. Story 45. It wasn't my call, but one we had to listen to in training to prepare us for what we were getting into. Guy calls 911 to say there's a body in his house. They go through their routine, eventually getting the name of the deceased. That's where things get odd. When you call 911, a caller ID displays your information so we can confirm it. When the man gave her the name of the deceased, it was the same in caller ID. She tells him she needs the deceased man's name, not his, as they'd already confirmed it. In a completely normal tone, he replies, "Oh no, I'm just telling you where to find my body and letting you know it wasn't a murder." The dispatcher spent the next few minutes trying to talk him out of it, doing her best to either convince him not to do it or trying to at least stall him until the team gets there. The entire time, the man remains calm, almost cheery, like he was just shrugging it off. "Nope, I made up my mind, I'll just be in the bedroom." The cops didn't get there in time. Dispatcher heard him say, "Thanks, bye," before a shotgun blast and agonal breathing. Cops arrived a few minutes later. I think it was just weird how calm he was about it. I've heard of people having that sort of more upbeat disposition when they finally make a plan to go through it, but actually hearing it struck me as weird. Story 46. I once dispatched a helicopter for a woman gored by a reindeer. Apparently, there is a reindeer farm for tourists, and she tried to kiss it. My pilot and flight crew laughed at the moy and asked 3 times to repeat. Story 47. Got a call from some girl saying, "Someone stole my car." I ask if she saw what direction they went. She says they're heading down the street and starts telling me the stores they're passing. I ask if she's following them. She says that she's in the car. I freak the duck out. She then says to whoever is driving, "Babe, slow down, this is crazy." Turns out she and her boyfriend were arguing. He started driving crazy since he was mad, and she decided to call it in as a stolen vehicle. Another story. We get a call that there's 2 loose dogs running around a major street. About 30 seconds later, an officer comes over the radio to tell me that they just hit 2 dogs on the street. Same dogs. Story 48. I was an operator in training for about 6 months, and the strangest I ever got was a guy called in and said he had just been carjacked by this hotel and then hung up. Called back the number a few times and couldn't get any more details. While I was trying to callbacks, our info channel dispatcher called the cell phone provider and got subscriber information. She recognized the name from a traffic stop that was a block from where the carjacking had supposedly occurred, and she had just ran. Confirmed the info in the 2 calls and realized the guy on the traffic stop had called in the carjacking, thinking the officers would ditch the traffic stop because the carjacking would be a higher priority. We never did find the phone that he was calling from. There was also one time where another operator had gotten a call from OnStar that they were tracking a stolen car from a nearby city, and GPS was showing it now in our jurisdiction. They wanted to get our officers to the vehicle, and once they were there, they would disable the engine in the vehicle. So we pulled up our traffic cameras on this wall monitor we had and were able to locate the vehicle and direct the officers where the vehicle was going via the cameras. Once in the vicinity, OnStar disabled the vehicle, and the driver bailed into an under-construction housing subdivision, and one of the dispatchers was able to tell our officers exactly which house the guy went into because we could see it on the camera, and he was caught. Story 49. Not me, but my aunt is a dispatcher. She got a call a couple years ago from a guy who, had something stuck in him. She's actually dealt with this type of thing before. Anyways, paramedics get there and find out it was an entire butternut squash inside of him and he couldn't get it out. Story 50. Not a 911 operator, but I once called 911 when my friend and I had been out walking our dogs and noticed a car drive by several times. We both got a super weird feeling about the car, and we knew most of the cars of our neighbors and it wasn't any of those. So we called 911 about a suspicious vehicle driving around the complex. I should add that we had just had a huge rash of robberies in the complex, further adding to our suspicions. So after we called, I turned on my radio to hear the dispatcher openly mock us for calling 911. About 15 minutes later, we hear popping noises and we hear someone peel out of the drive a block over. So we then hear police on the radio responding to calls about gunshots in the building behind us. Turns out that car we had reported was a man looking for his ex-girlfriend, and he lost her and her new boyfriend. They both lived IRC, and we got to talk to several cops about what we had seen and all that. I definitely felt stupid calling 911 about a suspicious vehicle, but I am trusting my instincts from now on. Story 51. It was my call to 911, but something tells me they've relayed this story from their perspective a few times. I got hit from behind by one of my 220-pound Suffolk Ram sheep. Never saw it coming. Knocked the snot out of me. Barely escaped as he was trying to finish me off. Once outside the fence, I went into shock as all the adrenaline drained. Had to call 911, overheard the EMT in the ambulance, trying to clarify to the ER that the patient they were transporting was not a victim of pedestrian versus truck. The hospital thought I'd been hit by a Dodge Ram pickup. Story 52. My dad was an ambulance driver for the French Army in Tahiti, and he received a call one day that an intoxicated Army officer jumped into a pool without any water. Headfirst. Story 53. Me, 911. What is the location of your emergency caller? Please help me. I get address, name, phone number. Means it. Tell me exactly what happened. Caller, please believe me. Why isn't anyone believing me? Me. Do you need police, fire, or EMS? Caller. There's chocolate coming out inside? What do you mean? Caller. I don't know. I just woke up and there's chocolate coming from inside. My grandma and mother won't believe me. I can hear people in the background having casual conversation. Me. So, how do you know it's chocolate? Caller. I smelled it. Gag. Ugh. Anyways, if you're not familiar, most 911 agencies in the US have EMS protocols we choose from. Breathing difficulty, back pain, chest pain, traumatic injury. There are 34 to choose from. And at this point, I'm at a loss on deciding which protocol to use. I'm debating between the standard sick call, which is what we choose when nothing else works, or a hemorrhage card, which is what I end up picking, thinking it's just a bad period and not chocolate. I end up giving her all the medical information and send EMS. I never heard from her again, but I do send the EMS unit that went a message asking about it. Me. So, was it chocolate? EMS. IDK. We didn't taste it. Story 54. This is a true story from when I was a journalist. Man called 911 and reports that he had been hit in the head. Who hit you? Don't know. Is he still in the house? Wasn't ever in the house. Dispatches cops and medical, and gets more questions to ask. Really health, loss of consciousness, etc. Figured the guy was mistaken. Nope, Hole in the window blood all over nasty wound to the center of the man's foreheads. Went to the hospital where he was stitched up. Minor concussion, vertebrae damage. Police found pieces of bullet in the wall behind where he reported standing and it matched the hole in the window. Never found the shooter. Determined it was a .38 from a long-range tumbling and hit him at such an angle that it was deflected. Story 55. 4 years into my life as a dispatcher, and I have personally taken or been party to death by gunshot while still on 911. I didn't take the call, but I played it back to make sure we heard what we thought we had. A woman who managed to dial us, but all we could hear was her agonal breathing, which was very, very spooky in retrospect. Multiple vehicle do-way crash where people were pinned and screaming. I'm not talking about fear screaming, I'm talking about agonized screaming. Compound fractures, head injuries, etc. Every time someone got on the radio, you had to strain to hear them over screams that were like nothing I've ever heard. People finding dieds are bad. CPR is always a struggle because people are scared, and sometimes, like I mentioned, you can hear the person's last breaths. Sometimes it takes a while to get to sleep after a shift. Story 56. I called 911 on an old man who had passed out in his locked car on the side of the road near an IHOP with his junk out in an adult mag. He had a heart attack. Story 57. Jogger found drunk male passed out in the bushes with his pants around his ankles. He was apparently robbed of his wallet, but the thief was considerate enough to leave a single debit card wedged between and sticking out a butt. We called the poor git swipe ATM for weeks. 2. Couple having sex in hotel room. Female falls off the bed and lands on a champagne flute, breaking it at the stem, puncturing through artery. She bled out and passed. Story 58. Not a dispatcher, but my mom is. When I was a kid, probably about 6 or 7, my mom was at work and my dad was busy doing something on the house, so I called 911 because that's where my mom worked and to come home and make me some food. Luckily enough, she was the one that answered the call. Her and my father were not happy at all. Story 59. Many years ago, I took a call from a woman whose daughter was pregnant and in active labor. She needed an ambulance to get to the hospital. We sent her the ambulance and she seemed to have everything under control until they could get there. Turns out it wasn't under control because she called back in about 3 to 4 minutes screaming, "We've got a baby." Apparently the lady was not just in labor, she was freaking delivering the baby, and mama just didn't know the difference. Story 60. I have so many. In the UK, so was 999, not 911. Hope that's allowed. I once spoke to a man that called up to say that he had slipped while getting out of the bath, and as he fell, the toilet brush somehow went up inside and was now stuck, and he couldn't move. Dirty old man. There was once a time when a man phoned up and said his son was having a heart attack in the street. The ambulance was called, and I was giving instructions over the phone what to do. When the crew arrived, the call didn't actually disconnect. I heard the ambulance crew ask where the son was, and the man said, "Right there, can't you see?" I just heard the ambulance crew say, "Sir, that's a jacket on the floor, not a person." Then the line cut out. The worst thing about working there was that you rarely got to find out what happened after you ended the call. Story 61. I used to volunteer at a death hotline, so this doesn't technically answer the question, but the call is similar to others in the thread. This guy calls and says that he'd escaped from the hospital and had hit himself. Obviously, anyone could be lying, but he was oddly convincing. He then asks my name, and I tell him. He says he's going to do my name into his arm, so he never forgets me. I don't think anything has ever creeped me out more in my entire existence, and I've heard some creepy crap. How do you even respond to that? I had no info on him, no phone number, no address, so I couldn't do anything about it either, even though I was pretty convinced he was actually harming himself at this point. He just hung up on me. There was no record of a similar call before or after this, and people who call in and make this stuff up usually do so multiple times for attention. I think it's probably made up, but I do wonder sometimes whether my name into someone's arm somewhere. Sorry if this doesn't quite fit. Story 62. During overdoses, people seem to have the idea that they can shock the person back to life by throwing cold water on them, slapping them. I've had people stop doing CPR and just start slapping the patient, or not starting CPR so they can go get ice. It used to be strange, but not anymore, unfortunately. Story 63. Oh man, it's my time to shine. We had this medical call where a guy's wife called and was saying that something was wrong with him. She claimed he had worms coming out of him. We sent an ambulance and a deputy due to the suspicious call. Deputy arrives on scene and reports to us that the caller was 100% right. The guy had worms coming out of him. It turns out that the guy had some type of bacteria fungi that you get from messing around with animal feces, per the medic's own deputy. The medics said they had never seen a case as bad as his. Story 64. Had a dude who called in on Thanksgiving because my wife is chasing me around the house with a knife because I called her bird dry. Also had a guy shoot somebody while on the phone with me. Also had a guy get arrested while on the phone with me. I don't miss those days. Story 65. One time I actually did help someone that was locked inside their car. Washing my car in a manual car wash, I kept hearing someone yelling, "Help! I go look, and the van in the next stall had 2 women in it. They needed me to open the door because they were locked in. Their indoor doors were broken. They had electric windows, and to get out, they would roll the window down and open the doors from the outside. But in the car wash, their car had died. Hence, no rolling down the windows. Now you may think all the doors didn't work. Even in the back? Well, these ladies were hoarders. They had crap stuffed to the ceiling, and literally only a place for them to sit was free. Story 66. Fiancé is a paramedic. I'm a patient care tech. Fiancé transported a psych patient to a facility. So they're chilling in the back of the ambo, and she's talking to her purse. After about 5 minutes of this, she unzips her purse, and a freaking opossum jumps out. My fiancé loses it, has no idea what to say or do. Then, the PT proceeds to tell him, if it wasn't for this lil fella, I would have hit myself a long time ago. Also last week, he got a call to a pretty bad part of town that ended up being a domestic violence. Husband beat the crap out of his wife because she wouldn't do met with him. She ended up having a pretty serious subdural hematoma. Story 67. Weekly occurrence. Male complainant calls in about several camouflage subjects in his yard. Unknown description as they are wearing dark clothing, and it's 4 a.m., so there's not much light aside from a street light several houses west of the address. Male describes them as tall, slender, most likely males, and they are standing behind the bush in his front yard. 3 subjects, maybe 4. Male puts the phone down momentarily. Faint sounds of vomiting can be heard. When asked to describe what the males are doing, caller states they are now on the neighbor's roof aiming something at him. 3 officers are en route. Male states the subjects are firing microwaves at him, and it's making him increasingly nauseated and pleads for the officers to hurry up. Caller refuses medical treatment. Rescue is not dispatched. Caller once again puts his phone down to vomit, and then states he has the subjects on video. After officers arrive on scene, the caller disconnects. Officer's status is checked after 10 min. Dispatch, I'm 10-4, I'll be clear. 1096. 1096, mental case story. 68, not necessarily a 911 story, but my mom has been a nurse for 25 plus years and always comes home with eerie stories. She said that she sees things in nightmares still. Years ago, a baby was brought into the ER by a neighbor who heard the baby crying next door. Rats hit his ear while he was fully awake, and the mother came to the ER and child services ended up letting her take him home. And my mother says she always thinks about that baby and where he is now. Story 69, late evening call. Woman had a medical procedure done on her foot, and she wanted me to send an officer out to help her change her dressing. I offered to send a medical crew out and see if they can help, but she didn't want to waste their time. We went back and forth about this. No way would I send a police officer out for this, and told her so repeatedly. The last time I repeated myself that I was not going to send police out to help her with her medical issue, but I would gladly send an ambulance to have her foot attended to by a professional. She got all bent out of shape and screamed at me, "An ambulance? For someone who's walking around? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," and slammed the phone down on me. I've also learned in the 10 plus years of dispatching to never say, "I don't think it can get any weirder than this," because something weirder happens. Story 70, not a 911 OP, but I was a debt collector briefly in college and called a woman to try to set up a payment plan for her 5-figure debt. It was around 8 at night her time. She started bawling, saying that she didn't even have enough money for gas to take her daughter to preschool that day, and that she would be better off dead, which was disturbing, but not as much as when she suddenly started mumbling, "Oh, poor sweet baby," and I heard a kid screaming and a loud car engine, but no answer from her. Had my manager call her local 911, who told me not to disconnect. She had strapped her daughter into a car seat and was trying to hit herself in the garage. Story 71. My mom's a nurse. She took the call from the ambulance, reporting in that they were bringing in a patient. They had a lady who regularly called an ambulance because she couldn't do fill in the blank laundry, roof repair, etc. One day she called because she stubbed her toe. It hurt really bad and she was sure she'd broken it. She lived a half of the block from the hospital and had a car. Bit Cook didn't drive it because her toe hurt so badly. It was just a stubbed toe, not broken or anything. Story 72. A friend of mine, 911 operator, once told me how he received an emergency call from a guy who had fallen down a manhole during wintertime. Evidently, he did not pay attention as to where he was walking and drunkenly strolled in his own world and fell into the manhole on his way home from the club by himself. Fortunately, he did manage to get a hold of his phone after falling about 2,005 meters from street level. If not, he could have been in serious trouble. Not like there was a lot of people around on that time. Said the guy had to be lifted out of the manhole by the fire depth and had to sew some stitches from a cut he got from the fall. Story 73. Had a woman call in saying she had been burned. After some questioning, we found out it was inside that was burned. Long story short, she was horny and her curling iron was not unplugged. Story 74. Operator, what's the address of your emergency? Caller, send the police. They have me locked in the basement. Operator looks at caller ID from mental health facility in Florida, which is famous for basements. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. What room are they keeping you in? I loved getting Baker Act calls. Story 75. Got not one but two calls in one night. Same guy. Had called for help as his junk ring was stuck and he couldn't get it off. Ambulance and fire arrive. First time they transported to hospital. He refuses to let them cut it off, the junk ring. Second call. 4 hours later, he's begging. Please, it hurts. Come cut it off. Story 76. Not a 911 operator, but I take calls for a medical alert. Company ALA Life Alert. Had a customer push her button and tell me she needed a coroner. When I asked why, she matter-of-factly told me that she passed and maggots were there. Story 77. 911. What's your emergency? My pa was in the truck and done fell out. Sir, can you tell me his injuries? Nah, he just done fell out. He was dead from a heart attack. It was a southern colloquialism for passing out that I didn't know. Story 78. So I was an EMT for a year. Too much for me and not the right job, so I bailed. But we had this guy in the worst part of town who was a quad. He had a catheter. Once a week, his family would pull the cath out and hire an escort, then call us to pick him up to take to the hospital to have a new one put in. You could get high just walking in the house. Fun times. 911 or 999 dispatch workers. What's the dumbest reason someone is called? When they released our city's stupidest 911 calls a few years ago. This was one. There's a deer in my yard. A weekly occurrence here. What is it doing? It's looking at me. Story 2. When I first started, one of the first calls I took was for a gentleman who stated, my butt sucked my sex toy all the way in and I can't crap. I can't poop it out. He was right. Medics aren't going to try and fish it out, so off to the hospital he went. As a newbie, I remember thinking that must be a 1 in a million call. 20 plus years in, I've learned that it's not. In fact, things stuck inside calls are fairly common. Story 3. I had a woman call and tell me a UFO had landed in her driveway. I was a little taken aback, so I asked her to describe it while I dispatched officers using her exact wording. Of course, officers scoffed, but still went en route. She said there was a silver metallic object that came out of the sky and landed in her drive. Officers arrived on scene, and there was a silver metallic object in her driveway. It was dark out at this time, so they approached it and found it to be a weather balloon. So it could actually be classed as a UFO. It had instructions on how to return it, so officers returned it a few days later. Story 4. I was doing at work at a dispatch center when a 911 call came in from a woman who said that she came home and heard a burglar upstairs. This was in a small town that doesn't get much crime. The town sent 5 of their own cops, plus they requested mutual aid from 2 neighboring towns. A total of about 10 officers cordoned off the area and set up a perimeter. Cops went into the house looking for the burglar. They found that the noise was caused by a Roomba that got trapped in a closet. The vacuum was banging against the walls and the closet door trying to escape. No arrests were made that day. Fortunately, no one was injured either. Story 5. I had a guy call 911 and wanted to report that a woman had stolen his money. We were swamped that night, so I kept him on the line, trying to get further information. Upon asking a few more questions about the woman and her description, it was obvious he was describing an escort. He then began to cry and begged me to not judge him for hiring an escort. I promised him I wouldn't judge him, and I would send him an officer as soon as we had one available. He hung up and I pended the call, as the woman was no longer on scene. He called back on 911 less than a minute later and proceeded to want to talk about hiring an escort until officers arrived. My partner and I continued to pick up his call after we had to place him on hold several times to take other 911 calls during the 15-minute period it took for officers to get to him. He ended up getting arrested for disorderly conduct that night as he was extremely intoxicated and decided he wanted to have a go at the officers when they arrived. Story 6. Because their electricity went out and they wanted the police to fix it, then got upset when I told them they needed to call their power company. I've also had someone call because their neighbor's tree was dropping leaves into their yard and they wanted the neighbor to clean it up. And one of the funniest, most ridiculous, because someone's automatic sprinklers turned on while they were walking their dog and they got wet. Wanted to press assault charges. People call for the pettiest things ever. I would always have them call back on the non-emergency line as soon as they told me the ridiculousness. 911 is for emergencies only, boys and girls. Story 7. She got shampoo in her eye while showering. She rinsed it out and her vision was unaffected, but it really stung for a minute. She was 27 and could not be talked out of having paramedics dispatched. When the medics got there, they couldn't talk her out of going to the hospital. She was fine, at least until she got word from her insurance company that they weren't going to pay for her frivolous and unnecessary ambulance ride. Story 8. Little old lady would call every morning to ask what the weather was like outside. No matter how many times we told her to stop, a grown man wanted to press charges against someone who flipped him off while driving. Story 9. There are apparently multiple people each month who think they can call the emergency number asking for the police to give them a ride home because they got plastered at a bar and don't want to drink and drive. Story 10. Not a dispatcher, but a dumb caller. Granted, I was about 7 years old at this time, though. A little background. My parents both worked, and my mom worked early evening to about 11:12 at night, and my dad got home about 6 p.m. then. So there was about a 2 to 3 hour gap where it was just me and my much older siblings, 8+ years, at home. Well, one of these days, my brothers were in charge of getting dinner going because Dad was going to be later than normal. Having 2 teenage boys in charge of dinner was my parents' mistake. However, my brothers thinking I had no authority or power over them was another mistake. They refused to make any food. I was 7 and had no idea how to make anything other than a horrible mixture of uncooked pinto beans, flour, and chocolate syrup. And I was begging for them to cook. Still nada. In their defense, Super Mario Sunshine is a really good game, and as an adult, I can now understand the predicament they were in. Addictive stuff. Anywho, my ornery, impatient butt gets the bright idea of calling 911 for help. Great plan, right? They'll bring food for me and all will be good. Well, for some reason, as soon as the dispatcher picks up, I freeze. The only thing they hear is a little girl shakingly say sorry right before hanging up. As their protocol demands, we had 3 police officers show up banging on our front and back door. My brothers ended up answering the door in only boxers and blankets wrapped around them. All was fine in the end and nobody got in trouble, and I finally got my dinner. It was a stupid reason to call, but resulted in a hilarious story. Story 11. People call us all the time because they are not from a rural area, and they think their 2-wheel drive vehicle can go over our mountain roads. They get stuck and somehow think because they are on federal ground that we are obligated to help them. We are not. Usually, these brainiacs who take their 1988 Accord over forest highways also don't bring anything warm to wear, or any extra food either. When they do remember to bring something, it is usually child that won't do well in the cold overnight. And when they get stuck and learn that it does not go 50 miles off of the pavement to come save you, they really start to panic. Either you have $3,000 for a private tow to maybe come get you, a long hike out, or you are truly in danger. And then maybe a search and rescue team will come out, at which point you may again receive a bill for their services. People, just come a little bit prepared, please. Story 12. To come to their 3rd floor apartment and change the TV channel. Somewhat innocuous, especially considering that the subject calling was quadriplegic. But 30 days and 150 calls with the same request later, it got pretty old. 150 calls in a month are nowhere near the record, though. That record is owned by a local gentleman who called 217 times in a 4-hour period, rambling on about zombie mayhem wounds and zircon ray technology. His phone was not GPS enabled, so we were never able to track him down, but at least when the zombie apocalypse comes, he will be proven right. Story 13. Not dispatch, but I used to field emergency court in the UK. Emergency court is 24-hour walk-in, strictly for cases that can't wait to be heard in regular court. Deportation, life support, emergency custody, serious stuff. That did not dissuade some dude from turning up and demanding that we stop his neighbor's cat from trespassing on his land, though. He ended up being fined later for repeatedly calling 999 over it. Story 14. Girlfriend is a dispatcher, and she has a ton of dummies calling. Her most wholesome call was a little boy called to ask if they had his uncle's phone number, because he had just gotten a turtle and really wanted to tell his uncle. Story 15. Not a dispatcher, but firefighter. We were called out to a residence one very frosty morning, midwinter, during a very long cold snap, because the homeowner couldn't open his front door and was unable to get out to get to work. We drove up, I got out, ready to force the door open, but tried it first. It opened with minimal effort, frozen a bit. I opened the door and called out, "Fire department, did you still need us?" He was so embarrassed, and it was hilarious. Story 16. If I fake something, the ambulance will take me to the ED, and that's closer to my house, so I less spend on a cab because I spent too much money on drink. Story 17. I had someone that wanted a vehicle towed because the license plate was slanderous towards her dead mother and the vehicle had STDs, her claim. Got mad I wouldn't send out a CSI team, called me an idiot with more colorful language, filed a complaint on me, then filed a complaint on my supervisor. My personal pet peeve of mine is when someone on Medicare doesn't have to pay for an ambulance ride, so they call 911 for doctor's appointments. By policy, we have to send them. It never fails, a cardiac arrest will come out, and my closest medic is taking someone to a routine appointment. However, pandemics seem to have brought the Karens out from all over. Story 18. I know someone who had to be rushed to hospital because she accidentally swallowed her false teeth whilst eating fried chicken. And here's the doozy. Didn't notice until she got another piece of chicken and tried to bite into it with her gums. An entire set of false teeth. She had to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital because When she called family members to ask them, they didn't believe her because it was so ridiculous. Story 19. Not dispatch, but a firefighter. Once called to effect entry into a house for paramedics. The occupant, who a tippling way, had called them because, drumroll please, she couldn't close her curtain. Story 20. Not me, but my parents. They were 911 dispatchers for 16 years. They frequently got calls from people who said there was a person near their house on the sidewalk. Their reason was they looked suspicious. Story 21. 1. Mosquito bite on her leg has been itchy for over 4 hours. She was calling from Starbucks. 2. Her son got a bit of sunscreen in his mouth when she was slathering his face. 3. Wedding ring won't come off their finger. We get one of these calls every few months. I could go on and on. Story 22. My ex-boyfriend called an ambulance to take him to the hospital because he couldn't feel his right arm. It turns out he had just slept on that arm all night, so he just needed to wait for the blood circulation to fix itself. He literally woke up and immediately called an ambulance. We live in a small town, so it took 2 minutes, and by the time he got the 3, the feeling started coming back, but he ordered an MRI on his family's comprehensive medical insurance, just to confirm. Also, this same ex-boyfriend booked himself a dentist appointment for excruciating mouth pain so bad he couldn't eat anything, and it turns out he just bitten the inside of his cheek. The dentist laughed him out of his office. Story 23. Not a dispatcher, but someone is 3 years old who called 911 that my dad went to work and that I miss my dad. I stuck to him like a magnet as a little kid. I'm assuming why I called 911 was probably because I only knew those 3 numbers on the phone, and seeing that you can talk to people on it. Thinking back, I feel so bad for doing that. According to my mom, the cops did show up at our house just to check what was up. Story 24. In the UK, a woman in her 60s called the police because she was watching a live WWE show where 2 wrestlers and Stone Cold Steve Austin were beating up The Rock. She later said she knows it's all just a show, but thought those 2 pesky bad guys had genuinely decided to attack The Rock. It's still real to her, damn it. Story 25. Not a dispatch, but one time my parents were out on a date and I called the police because my brothers were pulling my hair. I guess on the phone I sounded like I was screaming. So the police showed up at my house just as my parents got home. I got in trouble. Story 26. Not a 911 dispatcher, but similar. I received a call from a man saying he needed police out to his house, but he wouldn't tell me where he was. He said he needed to be restrained, but would not tell me a reason why other than he was a bad man. He kept telling me he needed wrist and leg restraints and a hood over his face. In my mind, I thought he was going to hurt someone or already had, so I stayed on the line to figure out what was going on with him. He then told me to tell him he was a bad man and deserved to be restrained. He would say, "Tell me I'm a bad man. Tell me I'm a terrible person who needs to be punished." Then it hit me. I spent 30 minutes on the line with a dude trying to live out his BDSM fantasy. I couldn't believe I didn't see it sooner. Story 27. There are so many in 9 years as a dispatcher. I once had an old guy call during the last government shutdown wanting to know if his cable was out because of the shutdown. Then there are the infinite number of Karens calling in to report suspicious activity in their neighborhood. It's always exactly the same. There's someone walking in their neighborhood that doesn't belong and they want them removed. When I press for more details, they dance around the answer. I always made sure to make them say on the recorded line it was because they were black. If you're going to be a racist pause, I'm going to make you admit it out loud. Usually, it winds up being their neighbor who's a heart surgeon or lawyer. I've had people call because their neighbors blew leaves or grass clippings onto their lawn and want them arrested. I had another call because it was raining and their yard was flooding and they were pissed off. Ma'am, we can't control the weather. The list goes on and on. Story 28. I work for an agency in a somewhat developed area, but still has lots of woods between developed areas. Get a call for a fox running loose in a parking lot in a strip mall next to one of the aforementioned wooded areas. The caller saw a fox on the side of the parking lot, chased it down and cornered it in the parking lot, then used his jacket to trap it. We get there and he was like, "I saw this fox and I caught it. What should I do?" And we were like, "Dude, let it go and stop bothering the wildlife." He reluctantly lets it go. To this day, I think that he was so proud of himself for catching that fox that he called the police department to brag about it, since there was no one else that saw it. Story 29. I worked 911 in SC and used to have a woman call every week and claim she was going to be assaulted. I was trained to take all claims seriously, and I still do. But week after week, she asked for the police to monitor her home to catch the abuser. And week after week, the police watched her pour some sort of condiment all over her pussy and claim she was abused. Sometimes milk, at least once, it was mayo. It varied. Also, we had a lot of people calling for ambulance taxis. They'd claim they needed an ambulance, ask to be taken to a hospital clear across town, then jump out of the back of a moving truck when they reached their stop. Story 30. Not a dispatcher, but a paramedic. Here are just a few of the silliest calls I've done. A bad dream, grown man, not a child. A splinter, painful pimple, A woman got her period a couple of days early. No pain, just earlier than she was expecting. A mosquito bite. A woman who had briefly felt cold, but then warmed up and still wanted to go to the hospital. A blister, a toe pain that had been there for 10 plus years, but for some reason needed to be checked out at 3 a.m. A man who got high and called asking for quesadillas, scratched by their cat, and felt too dizzy to walk due to blood loss. When the scratch had never actually bled. Paper cut. A man who wanted a ride to the hospital because they have better sandwiches than his group home. People constantly calling 911 on homeless people just existing in public. Not in distress, not causing trouble, not anywhere they're not supposed to be. Just existing where people don't like them existing. And one frequent flyer who called up to 20 times a day asking for paramedics to come and do things like turn on her TV or plug in her phone because she was too lazy to get out of bed. I have a million more, but these are just the first ones that come to mind. Story 31. Not so much a dumb 911 call, but a dumb decision involving the cops. My friend's dad is a police officer, and they once told me this story about this guy who walked up to her dad and asked for a ride. If I remember correctly, it was because his car was broken down and he needed to get to work. And apparently, you're just allowed to ask like that, IDK. But before he was allowed to get in the car, my friend's dad made it clear that the guy would have to be pat down first. He didn't say, never mind. He didn't pretend like someone called him. He didn't even try to run the other way. This guy straight up stood there and cooperated with him. And what do you know? There were substances on the guy. He wasn't high or anything, and he knew the rules beforehand, but he just wanted to be caught, I guess. Mad respect to this dude. IDK why he did it. But it takes some balls to willingly give yourself up like that. Unprompted. Story 32. We have a local drunk who is paralyzed from the waist down and regularly calls to have a medic take him to the bathroom. He will call and say his blood sugar is low, and once the medics arrive, tell them he just needs to go to the toilet, always at 4 in the morning. Story 33. I made a weird call when I was around 11. We had new neighbors just move in next door to a house that had been vacant for years. I didn't realize people had started fixing it up to move in at the time, and some strange dude I'd never seen before came over. He knocked on the door. I was home alone with my kid brother, so I opened the door, leaving the security screen shut and locked to see what was up. He said, "Hey, can you flush your toilet?" And it was so awkward with no explanation. I was confused but young and said, sure, then shut the door. My young too many movies mind started thinking that maybe he put a bomb in the pipes and wanted me to flush it to make it blow up. So I called 911 because I was scared of this extreme and unlikely possibility. The poor dispatch lady. She was probably so confused. Anyway, it turned out to not be a bomb or anything nefarious. The plumbing on that old house was weird and looked like it might be connected to our lines for our property, so he was trying to figure it out. I guess he was a contractor of some sort. But he was so awkward about asking a young kid to flush their toilet. Story 34. I'd like to say first that people call me on their worst day of their life. I've had calls that ripped my soul from me. It has made me more compassionate, and I love the service I was able to provide to my community. That being said, 90% of the calls are not emergencies. There are a category of dumb reasons people call on a regular basis. Let me give you one of the obscure ones. Guy calls in with a heavy Cantonese accent, tells the operator, "My wife don't do sex." I guess the wife must oblige the husband. Story 35. I once called as a teenager because the power was out and I wanted to know if it would be on soon. In my defense, I kept exotic reptiles that require very specific temperatures and it was winter. I was concerned for their health. Story 36. Medic here. I worked with a medic who moved to dispatch and he called 911 himself one evening while off duty because he was trapped in a room with a crazy cat outside the door. He couldn't leave the room or the car would attack him. He was crying and desperate when he called it in. For the next 4 years or so, we would meow periodically on the radio when he was working. Story 37. A couple of nights ago, I was sleeping and heard, 911, what's your emergency? Hello? I lift my head to see what was happening. My cat was laying on my phone and somehow managed to dial 911. I explained my cat stepped on the phone and called them accidentally. She just laughed and said goodnight. Story 38. Older brother's friend was, can't remember, a 911 dispatcher. One call was from a very angry, presumably white, conservative mom who caught her son engaging in activities with his friend. She said she needed the police to beat some sense into him. The dispatcher did send the police, but to have a talk with the mom. Story 39. I don't work for 911 or anything, but a funny story is that when I was like 4 to 5 years old, I called 911 because my mom fell out of bed and she wasn't getting up. Let me be honest, I was terrified that my mom was dead, but then my mom woke up like five minutes after I called 911. She says the conversation went like, "Mom, hey, my name, and what's the matter?" Me, literally crying, "I called 911 because I thought you died." "Mom, what?" Less than 1 minute later, police show up, knock on door, and my mom explains what happened. The officers chuckled and then came over and talked to me and said, "While it was good that I called because it may have been serious, you should always make sure first." Story 40. He was a super cooperative and sweet patient, and just having a really bad night. His Git friends kicked him out when he was having a hard time. So we picked him up basically to keep him safe. He had quite the cocktail of substances on board, so we convinced him effortlessly, he was very sweet, to let us check out his heart and make sure it wasn't struggling with the mix of uppers and downers. His pulse and BP were rightfully elevated, but healthy. At that point, phone made him call his mom, so he, mom, and myself had a lovely conversation in the ambulance. She wins Mom of the Year award for being so understanding and supportive of her son in a hard place, and he wins Patient of the Year for being a good self-advocate and so agreeable despite how scared he was. But don't do substances. Story 41. A story from my mother who was on a ride along, Cinco de Mayo. Believe it or not, there was nothing going on. Like, seriously, nothing. Dispatch gets a call. There are ducks on the side of a road. They aren't stranded, they aren't injured, just ducks on the side of the road being ducks. My mom's unit gets assigned. They jokingly request full lights and sirens. It was denied. They request backup. The unit they were next to was assigned with them. They arrive on scene, escort the ducks to a storm drain where they were headed to the whole time, and went on their way. Story 42. I don't work in dispatch, but work in a big box retailer. Customers have to do the line outside, and once you leave, you can't come back in as they're trying to limit the amount of people inside. Woman refused to do the line because it was long and then told us she'd call 911. So we saved her the trouble and called 911 on her. Story 43. I work in dementia care mental health, and a lot of our patients have mobile phones. We had a lady who was schizophrenic call 999 to say that her friend had been hit and there were men in his house. She gave his address and everything. She told them his wife was being held captive. We knew nothing about it until we received a call at 3 a.m. from the friend explaining his door had just been broken down by police and to ask if we could remove the patient's phone at nighttime to prevent this happening again. She must have been very convincing. She got sectioned not long after this happened, so to her it was very real. Story 44. Not me, but one girl that I know. When she was a kid, her parents told her to do something for them. I'm pretty sure it was a chore that she hadn't done. She was pretty ticked off by that, so she called the police on them. She told the lady that her parents were being mean to her, and the lady thought that they were abusing her or something. She got in a plot of trouble. It was hilarious. Story 45. Friend is a paramedic, UK. Says there's a lot of stupid calls, but the only truly stupid ones are the entitled people who won't listen to reason. The rest of the stupid calls tend to be elderly people who are so lonely that they just don't know who else to turn to. An old lady called once because she was cold and her windows were broken. Bit strange, but they go anyway, and the send police car over too. Turns out she's got no glass in her windows and no heating or anything in a cold English winter. She apologizes profusely for the silly call and says her landlord refuses to fix them. My friend calls the landlord, he cusses her out, and she passes the phone over the police officer. Thinking it's still my friend, he cusses the police officer out too. Most satisfying arrest the officer ever had, apparently. Story 46. I work at a hotel and a guest once called 911 because we were serving cold baked potatoes and that was a health code violation. She must have told them something ambiguous because, like, 6 cops showed up in a ducking hurry. None of the staff knew what was going on then. She ran over and believed she was going to get the hotel shut down for good. She got a ticket for being misleading. IDK all the details, but we watched the cameras after the craziness resolved, and the woman had stacked her potato with super cold sour cream and butter, like 1 cup each, then let the potato sit for 40 minutes while she wrangled her children, then gossiped with her friends before finally taking a bite. Story 47. To get a cup of tea, my great-aunt in her early 90s was still living alone. No one could convince her otherwise. She had an emergency 911 button around her neck. One time she fell. She pressed it. The nice EMTs came and brought her to the hospital. All good, and she returned home. Then later on at home, she got dizzy and, scared that she would fall, she pressed the button. Nice EMTs come, check her out, all was fine, reassure her, make her some tea to calm her nerves. Later on, she started just pressing the button because she wanted the nice EMTs to come over and make her tea. She went into assisted living soon after. Story 48. My favorite one. My sister put super glue into her eyes instead of her contact lens drops. 911 up. Okay, ma'am, please don't panic. I'll put you in touch with someone who can help. Is your sister nearby? Call her. No, she's driving herself to the hospital. Paraphrased. The operators then contacted cars to let them know an individual who may be nearly blind could be driving from X to the hospital. I have others, but they're darker. I have another where an individual who was a frequent caller found a microwave in a field and felt they needed to call in. It gets worse, better, when the caller informs the operator that they have just opened the microwave and it is full of poop. Definitely human poop, she says. Story 49. For a woman shouting in a dialect we didn't know. Weird enough, 2 POs went to the house. Ends up that they were living in that council house illegally. They got kicked out. So, a complaint about something minor have ended up kicking out the rude lady karma, if I've ever seen it. Story 50. The McDonald's by the interstate is out of toilet paper. They had a sign on the door that said that, but my 4IO can't read, so he just used toilet paper off of the ground. So I'm a man, and you're a woman. So I'm just calling to see how long I need to boil a hard-boiled egg. Story 51. I used to live above a pub in the UK, and next to the pub lived an alcoholic. He was a horrible man, but everyone felt sorry for him because he had pancreatitis, clearly due to be an alcoholic. He used to feel ill, call 999 for an ambulance, come into the pub for his last pint or wine or whatever for a couple of days, leave my exfil, his key, to feed his cat and sit and wait for the ambulance to arrive. He would be sitting at the bar, looking out the window, see it turn up, finish his drink, and walk out. That man was kind of glad he isn't wasting money anymore. Story 52. Gonna tell on myself here. While running, I once accidentally called 911 while thinking I was turning up the volume on my phone. Apparently, if you hit the power button 5 times, it calls 911. It makes 3 loud alarm noises first, but I couldn't see the screen to realize there was a cancel button. So I had to explain to the nice 911 lady that no, I was not being chased by a murderer, and I did not need assistance. I was just extremely stupid and out of breath from exercise. Thankfully, she was cool about it. Story 53. Not a dispatcher, but I had a coworker years ago who was caught smoking weed in his garage. Non-legal state. Cop who showed up didn't care and didn't ticket or arrest him, only made him dump his grinder out into the grass. This git calls 911 to report a cop made him dump out his substances. More cops come, take his grinder, pipe, bag of substances and charge him with paraphernalia and possession. Got fired because he no-called, no-showed for 4 days while he was in jail. Came back, told us the story, ended up getting rehired again a few weeks later, but he's a git. Story 54. I'm not a 911 dispatch, but I was an interpreter for a crazy lady who called 911 to say the Democrats are out to get her, and the cops and FBI are circling around her house trying to poison her. She got so worked up she started calling the mayor, who she suspects is also out to get her the N-word, and told the 911 lady to connect her to the state police department. Fortunately, the 911 lady didn't wait for me to interpret that part, and she just told me to disconnect. It was something I'd tell you. Story 55. I've taken calls where people were reporting people for driving for non-essential business during our pandemic lockdown. Other calls were from people reporting out-of-state license plates, which was totally fine. No U.S. state had a complete border shutdown that I know of. On the interstate, during COVID. How to explain to the Karens and Debbies that they are wasting my time. It got so bad that numerous agencies in my area had to put formal requests on their web pages and social media asking the public not to report this type of stuff. Story 56. Not dispatch or a police officer, but recently my stepmom called the police on me because I pushed her, even though I had my arms crossed and she pushed me. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere because I had like 3 witnesses, but still, it just seems so dumb when you know other people saw it. Story 57. I'm an EMT in a big metro system, and I remember going on a call to one of the usual shelters, and our patient, who had recently been using Meti, called for political advice. We had to explain to him that he needed to talk to someone else about that and that we were here to help if he had any health concerns. My partner eventually talked him into going back to sleep to clear his head. The call was dispatched as male with unknown medical problem. Story 58. I'm not a dispatch, but one day about 3 years ago, my elderly neighbor called 911. I thought it had been something to do with her heart problems because she called 911 a few times about things related to that. Anyway, I found out that she was trying to call her daughter and accidentally called 911. She was moved to an elderly home the next week. Story 59. We had a man call 911 in the middle of the night to say his lizard looked sick. Not a metaphor, like he thought we had like a tiny ambulance for lizards we could send. 911, operators of Reddit. What is the pettiest reason someone has called 911? Story 1. I'm not a 911 operator, but here we go. When I was in college, 90% of my professors were retired or still serving police officers. I was studying police foundations. One of the instructors was telling us about an older lady whose husband had recently passed away. She was dialing 911 every day because she was lonely and wanted a police officer to come and keep her company. They had tried explaining to her that 911 was for emergencies only, but she couldn't help it. To her, she was alone and wanted to have someone with her, so it seemed like an emergency. Eventually, my professor was the one to respond to the call. So he went to her house and sat with her. She made tea and put out some cookies, and they sat and talked until he had a call. In his eyes, it was public service, so he made a deal with her. If she agreed to stop calling for this reason, once every rotation of shifts, approx once a week, he would go to her house and have tea and cookies. She never called 911 again for that reason. And every week he'd stop by and have tea and cookies until she passed away a few years later. He finished the story saying something like this: "We should never forget that although law enforcement is a big part of our job, public service comes in many forms." Story 2. I received a call on the non-emergency line from a 90-something-year-old lady asking me what lamp she should put in her bedroom. I told her I did not understand and that the sheriff's office was not the correct place to ask. Eventually, she got upset and said, "Fine, I'll call 911. They'll help me there." I tried to tell her that 911 would just go back to me, and it was a misuse of an emergency line, but it was too late. 15 seconds later, 911 ring. I answer, and lo and behold, it was the lady asking, "What lamp should I get for my bedroom?" Story 3. Woman called because her pregnant granddaughter, who lived with her, and whose bed was the couch, wouldn't get off the couch so she could use it to watch TV. The woman felt very indignant when I asked, "What exactly do you want the police to do?" Officer cleared the call with, "She's got nowhere else to go. Grandma said it's okay for her to stay." Also, lots of ambulance calls for "I have a stomach ache," which was code for "I need a free pregnancy test." Story 4. Let's see. A person in a suburban neighborhood called to report a group of youths on bikes, skateboards, etc. Said they were up to no good. When asked what they were doing that constituted a crime or was dangerous, the caller admitted that they hadn't seen anything as such, but they just knew that these kids were up to no good. Didn't even dispatch anyone for that. During a very busy few minutes, some idiot with a scanner decided to call 911 and tell me that one of the local emergencies radio channels had an open mic. Basically, that refers to when a radio is accidentally activated and transmitting, potentially picking up any sounds, conversation nearby, usually for an extended period of time. Since we did 911 call taking and dispatching, I was actively listening to said radio channel as this person called. There was no open mic. On a fairly regular basis, people would call 911 because someone wouldn't return property that they had lent. This is 100% not a police issue. As soon as I learned that the property was given loaned willingly, it makes it a civil, i.e. non-criminal, non-police issue. On the other hand, this one initially seemed petty, but actually wasn't. A guy called, and I had a difficult time understanding exactly what he was saying. He was definitely talking about something coming out of his toilet, so I thought he was calling about a plumbing issue. Unfortunately, this is not unheard of, though it is certainly not a good reason to call 911. After listening a bit more, however, I realized that he was reporting demons coming out of his toilet. He was genuinely and very distressed by this, and I didn't suspect that it was a joke or prank. Unfortunately, there was no one I could send right away, so I decided to try to help. I told him to put the toilet lid down. He took my advice, and what would you know? The demons stopped coming out. He was very appreciative. We still sent someone once they were available, only a few minutes later. Story 5. I once had the cops called on me by my neighbor. There was a car parked on the street by his backyard, not blocking his parking space in front of his house, not on his property, not inconveniencing him in any way. It was not my car or that of anybody I knew. Same neighbor called the cops on me for animal abuse. My dog was in my fenced-in backyard with a bowl of food and a bucket of water in the shade. Told the cops I chained him up all day and night with no food. I showed the cops the pup and was just like, why would I chain up a dog in a fenced-in yard? Same neighbor called the cops on me for verbal assault when he knocked on my door and said it was against the law to leave my trash can by the road a day after pickup, and I told him to duck off and close the door. The weird thing is, I never did anything to the guy to get him to start this, and from what I asked the other neighbors, he didn't do that to them. Story 6. People who get cut off in traffic are probably the worst inane callers. Like, oh, so this happened 3 hours ago. You don't remember the road it happened on. You don't know the registration of the VOI. There was no traffic crash. And there is not even the insinuation that either party involved were under influence of substances. Noise complaints are similar. People calling the emergency line to complain about being arrested earlier, one once complaining about being charged for abusing the emergency line. I've had a woman call emergency because their sister was refusing to share their food at a cinema. But what is probably more insane is the serious incidents that are started by inane and petty things. Once had a serious FDV between a mother and daughter. The mother stabbed the daughter after an argument over the color of cupcake batter. Story 7. Not a dispatcher, but when I was in EMS, we were dispatched to a psych call. When we got there, this lady was standing outside her house, ready to go to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, I was talking to her and trying to get her vitals when she told me there was nothing wrong with her, that she heard a family member was in the hospital and needed a ride. So she called 911. Cops met us at the hospital for her. Story 8. We have this old, miserable neighbor who lives behind us that has called the cops multiple times for unnecessary reasons. It all started with his fence. He has an old chain link fence that was put up over 50 years ago with these ugly privacy strips going through them. The guy lives for this fence, even though he's never replaced any of the faded, weather-cracked strips, nor has he fixed the concrete base it's sitting on that's sunk into the ground, causing the bottom of the fence to bow outward at certain spots. Every once in a while, though, we'd see him hobbling through our yard with a broom sweeping his fence. He brushed the grass clipping, pollen, bird dropping, or whatever else he thought needed to be cleaned from the outside of his fence. It all started when our neighbors to the left of us wanted to put up a fence around their yard. They came and notified us just to be polite, and we said go for it. So they got a permit, had some guys come to install it, and they put their corner post right at the corner of their lot line, right up against the corner of the old guy's fence. Well, the old man threw a conniption fit and called the cops. He said he owned a foot of land around the exterior or his fence, so he could walk around it and maintain it. Now, this may be true, but the old man's neighbor to the left of his house already has a fence that connects to his. He can't in fact walk along the exterior of his entire fence, only the sides that abut his neighbors to his right and us, his neighbors behind. The cop points this out to him and asks why he has allowed them to connect to his fence, but now won't let these neighbors connect to it. He said he didn't allow it and doesn't know why it happened. The matter was ultimately settled by the police, who told the old man to get his property surveyed and to find where his lot line ends. Until he has proof he owns a foot around his fence, they can't take his word as such. And the neighbor's fence went up. Don't worry though, and he got back at all of us by attaching a no trespassing sign to the exterior of his fence that faced our yard. This was our visual reminder we can't go within a foot of his fence. Well, fast forward another year, and now the neighbor to our right is putting up a fence and wants to connect to the other corner of the old man's fence. Cops come out again, and the same situation unfolds. Old man is throwing a fit. Neighbor has a permit and says his lot line goes right to where the corner post is going. Cops explain the same thing about paying to get his land surveyed, and now the old man only has one side where he can walk along his fence. Now, since both our neighbors connected to his fence, we also wanted to enclose our yard. Because of the concrete slab under his chain link fence, the neighbors couldn't put their corner posts directly next to the old man, so there was small gaps in each corner of our yard. Since we have 3 dogs, we wanted to make sure they couldn't escape through the gap, so we put up a fence post in both corners to make the gap even smaller and prevent the dogs from squeezing through. Well, the cops show up again. The neighbor claims you put up fence posts on his land. We explain our side of the story. They tell him he needs his land surveyed. He demands we do it. Cops say they can't do anything further. A few months later, the cement slab under his fence has really started sinking into the ground and has caused the bottom of his fence to start bowing out even more. He claims we are vandalizing his fence. Cops, argument, survey, etc. Couple months later, our landscaper cuts the grass and some of the clippings go through his fence and onto his lawn. Cops show up, argument over the land, survey. One day, he was trying to spy through the fence, unaware our dogs were in the yard, and they all reacted barking and jumping toward him at the fence. Cops, argument, survey, etc. My little brother kicks a soccer ball over the fence accidentally. Cops, argument, survey, etc. We get an overground pool in our yard. Cops, argument, survey, so there you have it. It's been an ongoing battle, albeit a one-sided battle between us and our neighbor behind us for many years. There are even more instances of times he's called the cops, but the ones I've mentioned have been the most memorable to date. We are currently in the process of getting some sort of harassment restraining order against him, so we don't have to keep having our day interrupted by the police every so often. Story 9. Not on operator, but once someone called cops on me for leaving an unattended bag in the park by our house. Thing was, it was in a town of less than 1,000 people, tiny park. I was there the whole time. I set it on the table while I played with my young kids. The entire park is visible from any direction. I was never more than 100 from my son's diaper bag, and the cops came and seemed really confused when they saw me and asked if it was my bag. I was like, yeah? Then they told me why they came, and I was floored. They were annoyed with whoever called and left without further questioning. Story 10. Okay, so I was working the early morning shift one Sunday, and we had an old lady call in, mid-80s. She is panicking for reasons that are not clear until 5 minutes into the call. Her husband is on his deathbed. Me. All right, ma'am, I'm gonna need you to stay on the line while I arrange for an ambulance to go to your location. Would you mind telling me where you are? What's the address? Her. I don't need an ambulance. Okay, possibly a case of dementia here. No big deal, but need to verify husband's condition. Me. Ma'am, we still need to send someone over there just as a precaution. Would you mind telling me what's the matter with your husband? Her. I told you, he's dying. Don't you understand? Me. No, ma'am, I understand absolutely none of this, but I need to make sure you and your husband are safe. Me. Ma'am, would you mind telling me where you are? I just want to be sure you're okay. Her. I'm at the hospital. Me. Excuse me, ma'am? Would you mind repeating that? Her. I'm at hospital. I need you to send an officer right away. My husband is dying. Me. Good God above, show this woman your mercy. Ma'am, is there a doctor nearby that I can speak with? Her. No, I need an officer now. Me. And why's that, ma'am? Her. My husband is dying. Don't you understand? Me. I'm afraid not, ma'am. Would you mind explaining what you would like an officer for? Her. I need to file a police report. Me. What for, ma'am? Her. I need to report a theft. Me. And what has been stolen, ma'am? Her. My husband stole money from me. Yesterday, he went to the vending machine and used my credit card without my permission. Me. There, but for the grace of God go I. Ma'am, is this really a matter of life and death? Is this really an emergency you needed to call 911 for? Her. Yes. If he dies before I fill out a police report, I'll never get that money back. At this point, one of my colleagues comes back from his break and read the transcript of the call I had up on my screen after I waved him over. He is trying very hard not to laugh. It's funny, but I also feel bad for the woman. She clearly needs help, but not of the emergency kind. I hold my hand over the receiver and tell my colleague to call the hospital and get someone over there to calm her down before resuming the conversation. Me. Ma'am, help is on the way. Please wait with me on the line until we can get someone to you. It's protocol to stay on the line with the caller until assistance is rendered, and I figure it'll be only a few minutes before a nurse or a doctor can coax her away from the phone. To calm her down, I try distracting her a bit by discussing the details of the theft. Me. So ma'am, where was this vending machine located? Her. Down the hallway, overlooking the pond behind the hospital. Me. The pond, huh? That's nice. And what did your husband buy? Her. He said he needed to buy 2 bags of chips to feed to this big fish in the pond. He said that the fish had specifically asked him for the chips. I told him that was ridiculous. Fish don't talk. But he wouldn't listen to me. The fish asked him for chips? Interesting. Lord Jesus, give me patience. Now, ma'am, you said he used your credit card. How much did these chips cost? Her. About $3.50. And that was the day I quit my job, walked out the door, and never ate chips again. Story 11. Obligatory, not a 911 operator. 8 or 9 years ago, my husband and I had a couple of acquaintances over for dinner one night. They were from our local poker group. The 4 of us were having a great time when one of the guys accidentally knocked over the other guy's phone and cracked its screen. The second guy went mental. He started yelling at the first guy and demanded that he pay to repair the screen. The second guy agreed to it, but the first guy kept yelling and yelling. He called 911 and the cops came. He told the cops that the second guy broke his phone and he wanted to file a police report. He asked the cops to force the second guy to give him money to repair his phone. The cops were so confused and annoyed. We were mortified because it happened at our house, and the cops knew our landlord. We never invited him to our house again. Story 12. Not me, but a close family friend worked taking 911 calls for years. She said the number of calls they get about how to cook turkeys at Thanksgiving time is just baffling. Story 13. I felt really annoyed when I had to call the fire department once, but it ended up being justified. So if this doesn't fit, well, sorry, but it's what I felt was a petty call. So here it is, story time. It was a weekend, and this happened probably at the beginning of this year or sometime last. I was awake about midnight or a bit after when a fire alarm goes off in my building. For context, this is a 2-story building in hallway fashion with apartments on both floors running from the EL. So when an alarm goes off, everyone can hear it, even when it's inside someone else's unit. So one of these alarms goes off, and I write it off as someone burning something they were cooking and would be turned off soon. And I kept playing video games. If you're curious, I was playing Stellaris. So half hour goes by, it's about 1 a.m. now, and the alarm is still going off. I poke my head out the door and I don't know where it's coming from due to the echo effect in the hallway. I write it off again, and now I'm freaking out a bit. So I keep poking my head out again and eventually step out into the hallway. I was the only one investigating for some reason. After looking around a bit, realized the alarm that was turned on was the one in the unit across from mine, which had been empty for a month now. Which struck me odd because, well, nothing should be turned on. I figured it was some sort of cable that was melting or something, so I called emergency maintenance and explained the situation. They tried to reach their main employee and didn't succeed, so I called the fire department. They asked me if I smelled smoke after I explained it again, but I couldn't see smoke or smell anything other than something similar to burning plastic. But I said smoke because I didn't realize what I smelled until after I hung up. So as soon as I leave with my pets in their carriers and stand outside, all the fire trucks come in. And I mean all the trucks. And I felt so bad because deep inside me, I knew it was something that needed just one truck to come over, but I also understood it was better safe than sorry. So after they break in through a window and everyone but one truck leaves, they tell me the reason the alarm was going off was because maintenance left the stove on and it overheated. by the time they tell me it's 2 a.m. And I felt like I did a 911 call to the fire department for a ducking stove that was overheating due to maintenance negligence. I probably freaked the whole fire dep out that day too. Story 14. I had a guy call 911 just because he wanted to see fire trucks and ambulances with lights and sirens. He miscalculated. There was a cop too, and he was not amused. Dude spent the night in jail. Story 15. A woman called 911 right as she drove into the county I worked for. She was screaming about it, how the Burger King employees need to be arrested because they threw a milkshake at her. I asked clarifying questions that then asked her if she's sure it was in our county because we don't have a Burger King in that area, but the neighboring county does. She called me an idiot and to just send the police. Come to find out, she ordered her food, but then didn't want it because she didn't know there were a bunch of black people working there. The manager threw her milkshake through her car window. Another one, a very pregnant lady called 911 because the restaurant she ordered from got her order wrong and wouldn't refund her. She sobbed to me about how she's pregnant and she just wanted this certain dish. She threw the order of food at the worker, who placed his own 911 call for assault. That probably didn't work out in her favor. Story 16. Plenty of old people call 911 because they just can't rationalize who else call when something happens like a power outage. But they're usually very nice and don't seem to understand that 911 isn't the place. That said, had a guy call 911 because he lived in a gated community and the gate was stuck. Like, it wouldn't close. Nobody was trapped or anything. And he said, and I quote, "Well, I don't have a number for emergency maintenance, so I figured you guys would know somebody." In general, we also get a lot of calls of suspicious people that's just guy sitting in his truck for a little too long. Always really pisses me off to talk to the nosy ass people who are so paranoid of everyone that they waste my time telling me the black dude just doesn't look like he belongs here.